know it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Zed, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel, broadcasting live from Studio Zed.
Makes me act the way I do.
And welcome to another episode of the Doctor Zed Show on Channel Zed. As always, I am your host, Joe Alcock, or aka Dr. Zed for the purposes of this show. Today's episode is going to be a really fun one, and it's a subject near and dear to my heart, and that is sleep. So the title of today's episode is Perils and Pleasures of Sleeping or Not Sleeping During the Zombie Apocalypse. And I am very excited to be joined by Dr. Gandhi Yetish, and we'll bring him on in just a moment to answer the question, do zombies sleep? What is more dangerous during the apocalypse, sleeping or not sleeping? And for you students out there, does sleep deprivation make you into a zombie? I think the answer is probably yes. Why did sleep evolve? We want to encourage you guys to be part of the conversation. Use the comment section of whatever you're using to watch this show and ask us questions in real time. So let's bring him on. Dr. Yetish.
Hello,
Hi,
Dr.
Gandhi.
Zed. How are you doing?
We're doing excellent. So I'm here in New Mexico. Out the window, I can see snow accumulating. We're getting a nice snowstorm here. I understand that you're in France.
That's right. I'm in Paris visiting my girlfriend right now.
Wow, sounds like a nice place to be during the apocalypse. So I have known Gandhi for several years, back when he was here in New Mexico as a graduate student, working with Hilly Kaplan and studying dynamics of sleep in hunter horticulturalists, the Chimane of the lowland Amazon area of Bolivia, and you can tell us more about that. But it turns out that Dr. Yetish is truly an expert in the field of sleep, and I think he can answer some of these questions about how important sleep is or not sleeping during the zombie apocalypse.
Shall we start with this question?
Yeah, thank you, Erica, for chiming in here. So Erica O'Neill asked the question: what's happening when I sleep? Like, why do I even need to do it anyway? It wastes so much time.
Well, there's a lot of reasons that we sleep. One of the more recent pieces of evidence shows that when we are in slow wave sleep, which is what's considered deep sleep, when we're not dreaming, the blood flow to certain regions of the brain is reduced and the cerebral spinal fluid into those areas is increased, which is thought to remove a lot of the metabolic waste that comes from the brain cells. So basically, this is kind of a
garbage collection and cleanup. Is that part of the process in the brain?
Exactly.
Okay.
Throughout the brain and perhaps even throughout the whole body.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a restorative function. If you feel really tired when you go to sleep and you feel you're refreshed when you wake up, perhaps it's because you actually are kind of worn out at the end of the night, and then you are physiologically restored to some degree by the morning, assuming you've slept enough.
Yeah. And so just thinking about what the function of sleep is, that probably relates to questions that shift workers like myself have to deal with. I'm sleep deprived right now. I worked last night up until 3. I got, I think, probably not enough sleep. Only a few hours before I got up and tried to get some exercise because I'm going to go back into work this afternoon, dealing with the apocalypse of another sort. And I didn't really get much sleep. My sleep is all fragmented. It's different times every day. What can you tell us about that? I know you've studied some interesting populations. The San in Namibia. You've studied the Chimane, as we've mentioned, in the Bolivian Amazon. We know something about the Hadza in Tanzania. So yeah, this is a great question from Christina. I wonder if there are different sleep patterns across various cultures or different people with different lifestyles. Tell us about that.
There's an enormous amount of variation from place to place in how people sleep. It is extremely culturally variable. What seems to be more consistent is that the amount that you sleep over a 24-hour period, so we'll call that one day, the amount that you sleep may not be too different from place to place. There seems to be some kind of range of normal human sleep duration that's typical for an adult. but the way that you sleep, meaning do you sleep all at once or do you sleep in two bouts? Do you take naps? Do you not take naps? Do you go to bed early? Do you go to bed late? These are the kinds of things that are extremely variable. And even things like how long do I have to lay down in bed to get X number of hours of sleep is something that's very variable from place to place.
It does get pretty complicated, doesn't it? I've worked with some sleep researchers, and yeah, just the latency, how long it takes you to fall asleep, the quality of your sleep, whether you wake up, all these things are variables, right? Hey, but what's the purpose of studying groups like the San in Namibia or the Chimane? Why bother?
Well, we as a species, we're all descended from a common ancestor approximately 300,000 years ago, and we all basically are made of the same stuff. And these people, they are also fully modern people. They also have thousands of years of history, but what those thousands of years have left them is in a current state, in a current environment, a current lifestyle that is extremely different to ours. So much so that it's really hard to wrap your head around what does it mean when you live in a civilization that has agriculture versus living in a population that is what's called subsistence, meaning no farming. And there's a technical reason why Chimane would not be considered farming, even if they do grow gardens. That would not be the same thing as having a corn farm.
But the idea is that they are living a lifestyle which is more like maybe our common ancestor, we'll say 10, 100,000 years ago. Ooh, scary. I'm reading this little note here from Liz, and if you guys saw that banner, we are in a zombie apocalypse, raising all kinds of questions. And Liz is telling us we are feeling more and more like the zombies outside my apartment building. It's been going on for 2 days. Adrenaline fueled, not sleeping. Should I sleep? It feels dangerous. So that's a good question. If you're under threat, it might be good not to sleep. I wonder if the hunter horticulturalists or hunter gatherers can tell us anything about that.
They absolutely can. They live in an environment where they have not replaced all of the random wilderness that exists in the world with concrete and roads. There aren't even any roads that go to their villages, for example. So they're really out there living in the middle of nature, wild animals, snakes, lions, alligators, jaguars, and then other things like mosquitoes and ants even. Snakes especially. Snakes are the number one thing that people are worried about at night. They don't like to walk around at night because if you step on a snake, the snake will bite you. And so these kinds of
a snake is a pretty good proxy for a zombie, isn't it?
It is in many ways. It will just bite you, and then you will have a bad time.
That's for sure. Ooh,
they
another question.
Definitely do wake up to mitigate those threats.
Here we have a comment from Kelly's ASMR and Gaming. What about if you sleep in 2 or 3 hour increments? And this is something that I do sometimes. I've been sleeping less than 6 hours a day, and getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep has been helping me. Can you elaborate on incremental sleep or even fragmented sleep?
Sure. Typically, it's considered that if you sleep in a single bout, maybe that's better compared to having it broken up. But I think that the fact that you said that it's been helping you is very telling in and of itself. And quite frankly, if you think that it's working for you, you should stick with it. Because most of what we know about insomnia and sleep problems is based off of patient complaint. I'm not treating patients myself. Perhaps you can speak to that a bit better than I can, Dr. Zed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the medical thinking about sleep, we worry about inadequate sleep being a problem. And there are a whole bunch of health problems that go along with that. Hypertension, increased risk of cardiovascular disease and strokes. There are myriad bad problems of not sleeping enough. So Christina asks, what's more important, the number of hours we sleep or the quality of sleep? I think the answer to that's probably both. But what is normal? I got, I'll say 5 hours and 50 minutes of sleep last night. Is that enough? And what can we learn from the Chimane? What's normal if we think that they are sort of stand-ins for a more typical human experience?
I would actually say that it is both, but because they're not entirely the same thing. So if you go to bed at midnight and you wake up at 8 a.m., you might say that you slept 8 hours. But in reality, what you did was you spent 8 hours in bed. And
Right.
it's a normal part of the sleep cycle to wake up for a minute at a time throughout the night. And that's totally normal, healthy thing. Usually you're not even aware that you did it. So if you spend 8 hours in bed, you may have only slept about 6.5 or 7 hours. Now, if you had more interruptions than normal and you had a particularly poor sleep, you may have gone to bed at midnight, woken up at 8, but you had poor quality sleep, when in reality, what you actually would have had would maybe 6 hours of sleep or 5.5 hours of sleep, but it felt like bad quality.
Ooh. Here's another question that I think you are well equipped to answer, Gandhi. And this comes from Liz. Does normal amount of sleep, does this change from season to season? I feel like I slept better over the summer. That's a good question. What do you think?
It is. Well, what I've seen in both Bolivia and in Southern Africa is that people sleep about 1 hour per night longer in the winter than they do in the summer. So that would suggest like that then the same people do from season to season. So the way that I would interpret that is something about the summer. It's hot. There's a lot of energy, sunlight. You're doing more stuff and you're sleeping less and you feel less tired. That seems to be the correlation that we see. And in the winter, you feel more sluggish. You want to sleep more. And in fact, people do sleep more.
Is that a way to conserve energy? It's colder in the winter. Like I said, I'm looking at snow accumulating outside my window right now. Might not be a great idea to be out and about unless you're properly dressed.
Absolutely.
Ooh, and this is even a better question from Erica, and she's replying to Liz. She says she hasn't checked outside yet. She's worried though about how much sleep she will need to deal with fast-moving versus slow-moving zombies. The resource demands are different. So I want you to comment on the different kinds of zombies, but also please tell us, like there's two different things that can happen when you're sleep deprived. Right now I'm feeling a little energetic, maybe even a little hypomanic from I probably did not get good quality sleep last night. Sometimes that makes me feel sluggish and headachy, but right now it's making me feel kind of energetic. So yeah, what can you tell us about her question, the fast and slow moving zombies?
Well, what I've seen is that the reason, if you're not going to sleep, there's usually a reason. And if that reason happens to be some kind of immediate threat, like fast-moving zombies, you're probably going to wake up and you need to run right away. If you wake up and you're groggy, it doesn't even really help you that much to be awake. But if you got slow-moving zombies, it may be the same kind of a thing, but it's not quite as alarming, perhaps, especially if you have like The Walking Dead, where they put like the barbed wire with the metal thing so that the zombie walks into it, you hear the noise, you wake up and say, I'm not in danger, but I do need to deal with this right away. It's a bit different than if you hear fast approaching footsteps that scare the zombie guts out of you to make you wake up and start moving right away.
Yeah, good point. That kind of gets to this idea of when we're under threat, it might be good to be able to wake up and then be activated relatively quickly, but that might interfere with your ability to go into these deep sleep cycles, right? So fragmented sleep and sleep quality might be a reflection of how much your body feels like it's under threat from zombies or anything else. I have a research collaborator who studies abused children, and they deal with a kind of a different kind of zombie analog, a parent or a step parent or somebody who might actually harm them. And it turns out they get very, very disrupted, fragmented sleep. And this researcher pointed out to me when I gave him a sample of emergency physicians like myself and looked at our sleep patterns. He said, you know what? You guys look like abused children with your sleep patterns. You fall asleep, your sleep latency is very short. You fall asleep quickly because we're sleep deprived, but then the quality of sleep is very poor. Maybe because we're under a lot of stress and we have lots of cortisol flowing through our veins.
Absolutely.
And Christina asks this question. Does humans' capacity to stay awake longer diminish as they age? I'll just speak to this just briefly. So I work shifts, and that's just the nature of working in a 24-hour hospital environment. So we have some people that work night shifts, day shifts, evening shifts, etc. And most of us are on a rotating schedule, which makes the docs a little bit different from the nurses. Nurses typically work more of a set schedule, and that might possibly be better. But we do find that as we doctors get older, probably true for anybody working shifts, that the ability to stay awake overnight does diminish over time, and shift work becomes more onerous as we get older. Do you know anything about aging and sleep, Gandhi?
I know a little bit. There certainly is the kind of story that older people in the U.S. will go to bed early and then wake up at like 4 a.m. and that kind of a thing. But I haven't actually seen that in the places that I work.
Yeah.
So
So
it requires a lot more study.
So as a hospitality worker, Christina tells us she went through the zombie apocalypse staying awake and working in hospitality for more than 72 hours when she was in her early 20s. But now, a decade later, she doesn't think she can do that. I think that's probably true. I remember as a trainee, as a resident, doing every other day call, so I would only sleep every other night, and that was bad. I didn't enjoy it at all, but I was able to do it, and I just don't think that I could do that right now. Which also brings up the point. This is another great question here from Kelly. We'll get to that in a second. That sleep, keeping people awake is a form of torture. I believe it's actually prohibited by the Geneva Convention to prevent prisoners from sleeping. And here we do this in our work environments all the time, which is kind of nutty, right? That was just a thought I had. Kelly from ASMR and Gaming asks about this phenomenon, which I don't know too much about, autonomous sensory meridian response to get sleep. That might work. I think you can watch videos, right? And this may have a calming effect on people. I can't even speak to it because I'm not sure much about it. Do you know anything about this, Scotty?
Not specifically per se about ASMR, but I think it ties back to the other question as well. You need to feel soothed and safe when you're going to sleep because obviously you're very vulnerable while you're sleeping. And so anything that makes you feel safer makes it seem to your body like it's okay to sleep right now. If you feel like you're under threat because you have an abusive parent or because you're a doctor and you're afraid that one of your patients is coding, you're not going to sleep that heavily because you know that you might have to get up and do something right away. And so for some people, something like ASMR might be very soothing to them to help them fall asleep. But I do know that there are cases of other people who prefer to listen to noisy things because it helps them fall asleep. It seems to me that, based off what I know, that when you do sleep, you're still processing auditory information. And whatever it is that you're used to that is a cue to you that you're in your normal conditions and everything is safe and fine and you can sleep, then it's cool.
So Liz says she needs to feel safe during the zombie apocalypse. What a breakthrough. I think that's true. To be able to get good quality sleep, you have to feel safe. That might involve white noise or ASMR, or there are, I think, even using, Amazon has different playlists of things that are supposed to make you fall asleep. So have you ever had problems sleeping yourself? I'll pose this question to the audience too. And what do you do to help you sleep? And then getting back to our age question, Erica O'Neill asks, how do pathologic functions like Alzheimer's, dementia impact our sleep? Again, from my medical background, I can tell you that I believe that folks with these issues do have diminished sleep and probably changes in sleep quality.
Right. They call it sundowning behavior because often they get very patients become very agitated around sundown when things get dark, perhaps because they're more likely to misinterpret something that's normal in their environment as a threat, which would certainly make a person agitated if you think there's a threat immediately surrounding you.
Yeah, which is kind of sad to think about. You have decreased hearing, eyesight, decreased cognitive ability. It tends to activate anxiety, a sundowning phenomenon. You don't recognize your relatives. You feel profoundly unsafe, I imagine. And that might be sort of a real kind of medical version of a zombie apocalypse for the people with that experience. And it just sounds terrible, doesn't it?
Indeed. Yeah, you really have to feel some empathy.
Yeah. Liz asks, as an undergrad, she was able to stay awake for days. She could never do that now. Is it healthy to pull an all-nighter? What does that do to people? Does it make you into a zombie?
I would say so. I certainly felt that way when I've ever tried it. It generally looks like that if you were to study some of the night and then sleep some of the night, that you would perform better on the exam the next day.
I see.
But it's a common thing. If you didn't study at all and instead you just had a good night's sleep and you felt very rested, but you did zero studying, I don't imagine that you would do very well on the exam. So I think that ultimately you have to find a balance is necessary.
Yeah, so you're pointing out that it's a trade-off, right?
It's a very good word.
Probably most of us have done this. Okay, here's my tip. It's been a long time since I was a student, but I do remember that I remember being aware of this and this idea that kind of writing down information to your hippocampus and making long-term memory or even short-term memory requires sleep. And I would think that the number of times when I would study and then sleep, so the number of sleep episodes I would have after studying would improve my performance on an exam. So I learned at some point for me that pulling an all-nighter was actually counterproductive. It messed up my mood, and my memory was fragmented, and my recall was messed up. Okay, another question. Kelly asks, when she gets really tired and wants to sleep, why is it that she feels like, why do I feel like I get an organic energy boost for about an extra 2 or 3 hours before I pass out tired? And again, I'm assuming that Kelly is a she. I don't know. So I just want to make that point. But yeah, what's this energy boost for 2 or 3 hours before sleep? What's up with that?
Well, there's competing systems in your brain. One of them is pro-sleep, and one of them is pro-being awake. And the longer you're awake, the more the drive to sleep increases. And obviously, you can't just fall asleep randomly throughout the day. You have to wait until a certain time of day. And so you have this balancing act between the two. And I would say that what you're describing sounds like whatever it is that's keeping you awake is being very active, perhaps more so than your sleep-promoting parts of your brain. Perhaps because it's the time of day, perhaps because something you ate, perhaps because of the stress and things that you're thinking about.
Naps. So Liz asks about naps. Hey, do the Chimane nap?
They do.
Do they?
It's not necessarily an everyday thing, but it does happen. It's a normal kind of thing, maybe once a week for older type people in particular, but it's not a lot of statistical strength to support that per se.
Okay. Another good question. I do want to kind of return to the Chimane here in a second, but first, Christina asks, do zombies sleep? And do they dream of decaying sheep? I love it, Erica. What a great question. And we talked about this a little bit in the pre-production session. Gandhi, we were asking, do zombies have normal bodily functions? Do they, they run or walk or stagger? They vocalize, maybe. They seem to like to eat brains, but do they poop and do they sleep? Answer.
That is the question. It's hard to study. I try to figure out what people are dreaming about in the places that I work. And it's the language barrier is extraordinarily complicated. And then the cultural barrier is also complicated. What does it mean when someone says, I dreamed I was at the end of the world and I saw my grandfather and Jesus and they were singing and they told me to come join them? Is that a good dream? Is that a bad dream? It's so incredibly complicated that passing through the filter of translation makes it very difficult to really have much confidence in interpreting it. So they might dream of decaying sheep. I don't know. Yeah. But if they sleep or not, I would bet that there's a circadian pattern, time of day, of when they're more active and less active, which could potentially be considered a form of sleep. Dolphins, for example, are always moving around, but they do have what looks like half the brain sleeping at a time. So maybe zombies have something like that going on. I don't know.
Are there any organisms that don't sleep?
It depends on how you define sleep, but I would say probably not. I would say that they all do because before we had sleep, we still had daytime and nighttime, and even plants and bacteria will respond to daytime and nighttime by either being more active or less active. And evolution only works with building on what's already there. So if you start with that and then you introduce the question of should you sleep or not, I would say that most organisms are sleeping.
Yeah. So we evolved on a planet that circles the sun. So we give a 24-hour diurnal nocturnal cycle, and all life is subjected to that. So we'd expect to see that kind of circadian rhythm. So interesting thought. Maybe we all sleep. Then the other question is, do we dream, and why do we dream? I certainly during this whole COVID-19 experience, I feel like I am dreaming more, and I can remember my dreams more often. Sometimes they're disturbing, sometimes they're less disturbing. What's up with dreaming? Any thoughts?
Dreaming occurs during a type of sleep called REM, rapid eye motion, not a reference to the band. And that has only been seen in mammals, birds, and maybe some reptiles. It's very difficult to say. And so why do we have it is a good question. It's still being debated. Some people would say that there's some kind of benefit that you wake up from your dream and it makes you think about certain things, and that could be beneficial to you. But the counter argument might be that if you were thinking about that exact thing already anyway, and then you fell asleep, when you're asleep, it's not like your whole brain has changed its activity pattern. It's only certain regions of the brain that have changed their activity pattern, even though obviously your body has changed quite a bit. And so it could just be that you're thinking while you're sleeping as opposed to thinking while you're awake, and for that we use the word dream.
Okay. Well, do you fall into, say, the strong adaptationist camp, which would argue that here we see some phenomenon which is widespread? Most mammals, other birds, some reptiles maybe have this dreaming phenomenon. Does that mean that it's adaptive just in general? Would that imply that it evolved, we'll say, for a reason, quote unquote?
I would say that we don't have information towards that end, but I would suggest that it should be easy to see a reason if there is a reason, if it's so widespread. And we haven't seen that. So I think that there's a lot of projection of what we already think about things before we see the data that goes into that question. We have to be very careful.
Ooh, Christina poses a question here about siesta. And I remember we were in a candy shop in Madrid, and they were bringing down the bars over the windows, and they were trying to kick us out. And we're like, what's going on here? So it's time for siesta. They take it very seriously. Is it healthy to be in a culture with a siesta or sleep after eating, maybe in the afternoon? People oftentimes are sleepy during that time of day. Is there a reason for that?
There may be a reason for that. I think that these kinds of things can't be completely looked at in a vacuum. If you live in one of these Mediterranean climates where it gets so hot in the midday, especially after lunch, the hottest hour of the day is not at noon, it's a few hours later, presumably after lunch, maybe it is useful to have a siesta. Whereas if you live in a place where that's not the case, maybe it's a little bit different. I will say, though, that in non-human primates, it's a very common pattern you wake up, you eat a bunch of leaves and fruit, then you fall asleep, and then you wake up and you do it again, maybe a couple of times, and then night falls and you sleep for a much longer time. So there are examples of this being a normal activity pattern.
Okay.
In primates, at least. All
right. Do you find that some of the people you study in these groups, do you find people that do have insomnia or stay up most of the night? Is that a thing?
Not the way that we would call clinical insomnia. There's nothing like that. There are cases where people will stay awake, or if they won't be able to sleep, but usually for insomnia, we'd say that's for no reason. Whereas when I ask people, were you able to sleep? Why couldn't you sleep? There's almost always a reason. And they say, I was thinking about something, or I was worried about this, or my baby was sick, or what have you.
So you don't find people who complain, hey, I wish I could sleep, but I'm not able to?
I have not come across anyone who said that to me.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Maybe part of the reason for that, I know that activity patterns and sort of the amount of time people spend walking or engaged in physical activity is quite different, perhaps. in some of these groups compared to us, which is something that we can do if we want to sleep more, if that's something that we think is advisable during a zombie apocalypse, is to get some exercise.
It could be. I think that the fact that, you think you want to be safe during a zombie apocalypse to sleep well, and it seems almost like a joke, but that's because you're comparing non-zombie apocalypse to zombie apocalypse. Whereas when you're within the zombie apocalypse, some nights may be safer than other nights, and that's what you're going to be responding to as a person. So if you live with no walls and you're just in the middle of nature, you find a way to get used to it. Either you keep a fire going and the smoke scares the animals away, or you have a dog, or what have you. But if you're used to having walls and climate control and everything is very controlled and there's definitely nothing there, and then you hear some strange noise from the wall, like one of those bugs, and it just freaks you out, then you start to get afraid and you're not able to sleep. And maybe it's not a bug. Maybe it's your blood pumping in your ear that you're interpreting as a threat. And so it becomes very difficult to deal with because the threats that you have to worry about may not be real. It's almost like an autoimmune type of thing to be an insomniac in better sleeping conditions, I would say.
Yeah. So we have maybe time for one final question. I don't know if there's something on in the queue worth bringing up. Liz asks, I heard that sharks don't sleep. Good. That's an interesting thought. I don't know if they do, but certainly we humans, the thing you're talking about is that we humans are adaptable. Even if we might have problems sleeping if our circumstances change, but we can deal with that after some period of time. That's what you're suggesting, but maybe sharks don't sleep at all.
I think that if I remember right, I'm sure I read this once and didn't take a note on it, but if I remember right, there are periods where sharks are kind of like floating in place and they're not really moving, and that's kind of thought to be like a sleep type behavior.
Yeah, they don't have swim bladders, so they're actually not neutrally buoyant, so they will sink if they don't swim.
Right.
But of course, they can reef sharks and just kind of lie on the reef. I've seen that before. Anyway, it's a good question, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience?
I think that if you try to control everything by just deciding what you want it to be, it's very challenging to get it completely right all the time. Just remember that your body is something that has evolved over a very long period of time to respond to a very wide number of things that can come up in life. And the body is not stupid. And so the body is interpreting things that we may not even consciously recognize. And that may be affecting our sleep quite strongly. And so I would always start when I have problems with my sleep by asking myself what's my body telling me? And is my body telling me something that's true, or is it misinterpreting something? And then I go from there.
Yeah, so you're very analytical about it. Yeah, that's a great way to wrap things up. And Dr. Yedish, how can people reach you if they want to kind of reach out to you on social media, or do you have a blog or anything that's any thoughts about that?
I'm trying to start a blog and put all these things together, but it's too many things going at once. I think the easiest way would just be to email me. My email address is gandhi@yatish.com. You can see the spelling of my name here presented below, but gandhi@yatish.com by email is the best way to reach me.
All right. And thank you for that feedback, Erica. So that wraps up another episode of the Dr. Zed Show. Next up, tomorrow we'll have Eat, Pray, Run with special guest Keith Tidball with the episode entitled Hyperlocal Holidays. So do tune in for that tomorrow. And with that, this is Dr. Zed signing off.
I know it's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural